Hi everyone, I'm Shaun from Retirement Village Financial Advice, and this seminar today is about some of the changes that have happened in recent times. Just in this last year has been one of the greatest years for retirees with financial changes budget-wise, so we'll go over that and some of the considerations around retirement villages and whatnot, and there'll also be plenty of time for questions. We'll see how we go, in whether we do it in while we're doing this presentation or at the end, and I'll stick around afterwards. So, brief one about me when I'm not at work. I'm sometimes a member of the Army Reserves, so I spent 6 years in the full-time Army. That's a picture of me after 3 or 4 days, I think it was 3 days, no food, no sleep, on a weird little island off the north coast of Australia. We're going after it was during a border protection operation. So after all of that, we're wet, cold. Those were the tastiest 2-minute noodles I've ever had, and someone snapped a picture of me. I'm either riding around on my motorbike, which I love, one of my best lifestyle decisions, or I'm running around with my 3 kids. But I guess more personally, all right, before I go into it, why I do this, Retirement Village Financial Advice, is that I went through the whole gamut of this with my own family. So my grandparents, they came to the country in '67. They bought their forever home, and it was more than just a home. And I basically went through the whole transition from them, where they downsized the family home, the 4-bedroom big family home, which was appropriate for them at the time. They had 3 kids. Then they went from there into a retirement village, near Aveo in Glen Waverley. And then they went from that into residential aged care around the corner too. And I realised, me as a financial advisor who was, a lot of the family turned to me as the guy who's meant to know all of this stuff, but what I realised very quickly is it has nothing to do with normal finances. You can know super, taxes backwards, yet not have a single idea about what a deferred management fee is, how that actually works, aged care and all of these. And that was when I became an expert in this stuff, because I needed the information for myself, not because I learnt it at uni. And that was a number of years ago now, and now this is my area of specialty, and that's why I love to just come to places like this and have a bit of a chat. So what we'll cover today, there's been some big changes. I've spoken to a few people around the room about some of the recent changes, because I mean, I'm sure most of the people around here, you've probably been following for the last 15 years or so, rules around superannuation, pension, everything has continually got tighter and tighter. They haven't been kind to retirees. For once, this is probably the first time in the last 10 years I've seen it go back the other way. So this is really good. And I just want to make sure that no one misses anything, leaves anything on the table, because I'll tell you what, the money's better off in your pockets than the government. So we'll talk about things like the superannuation changes. We'll talk about some of the Centrelink changes that have also happened. For some people, it'll be the pension. Other people, it'll be the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, more commonly, that I deal with. And generally about retirement and just some of the care options, because one of the other things when you move into a retirement community is that what I don't want, the trap that I try to avoid for my clients is, it's a bit like that pregnant couple not purchasing the 2-seater car. Might be appropriate for them now, but things will change. And so when it does, what happens? So in terms of the biggest budget changes that are affecting people, one of them is around the downsizer super contribution. Now, has everyone heard of the downsizer contribution? So, all right, we'll go into that because it is fairly important. And just purely from a housekeeping, we are recording this whole thing, and there'll be some photos taken. So if anyone has any objections to their face or anything else, can you please just let me know at the end? So that would be great. So the downsizer super contribution is a bit of a game changer. We'll talk about how that can work, and even superannuation contribution changes, and the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, which hopefully most people have got access to, or we're probably at the age where we'll talk about what it actually gives you. So the biggest question is, why superannuation? And there's a bit of a misconception. A lot of people, when they think of super, they think of, oh, well, I'm going to put my money, I don't know what's going to happen with it. But what superannuation is a tax structure. While you're working in your personal name, and yep.
Are we getting notes on this? Or?
Yeah, I'll give you a whole, everything we go through, I'll share that with, I mean, Alice, Simone, and there'll also be a recording which I'm happy to share. So, now in your own individual tax name, that while we were all working, you were probably paying tax at up to 47%, whatever the rate was when you were working. Fair enough, most people are probably retired or very close to. The other thing that people often forget about though is the capital gains. Things like shares, investment properties, things that you hold in your own name, whilst they're perfectly appropriate while you're working, after we get into the retired status, then we start having a few other questions about, well, what happens when we sell it? And what about if we don't spend all of that in our lifetime and we start thinking about our children too? Grandchildren, bequests, and making sure that is appropriately planned. So in your own name though, on income, and that's things like dividends, you can pay up to 47%, and if you get the discount, potentially be whacked up to 23.5%. There's the company, but for most people, superannuation, just generally speaking, before 65 for most, it's taxed at 15%. That's for someone like myself, and there is tax on the capital gains too. But after 65, we get into this almost magical little window where they really look after you, where you pay 0% tax on income and 0% tax on capital gains. It's just absolutely brilliant. I wish I could do more of it, but until I get to that age, I'm not going to be able to take advantage of that. And look, the government knows about that concessional tax treatment so much, they've been dialing that down. And they've been reducing the amount that you can have in superannuation over the last few years. They've been making it harder and harder to get money into superannuation. So a big one is that it reduces the tax that you'll pay on your investment earnings. Things like shares, your dividends, properties. And we can make things a lot more simple to nominate a beneficiary. But the other part that I talk to a lot of my clients about is, and something that people aren't aware of, is while you're working, your employers, hopefully most of us went through a point where your employers were probably putting in that anywhere from 9-10% now, but where they were contributing, you might have used things like salary sacrifice. What that does is that forms part of your taxable component. While you withdraw it, it's 0% earnings, that's fine. What catches a lot of people out though is that if it goes to a non-dependent beneficiary, so that's not your spouse, if one person passes, it'll go to the spouse, absolutely fine. But a lot of the people I deal with, they're more worried about the next generation. They probably won't spend their entire wealth position and leave a $0 position by the time they pass away. What they don't realise is that there's an immediate 17% tax on any taxable component if it goes to a non-dependent beneficiary. So as an example, if you've built up your super through salary sacrifice and other things like that, if you've got $1 million in super, the majority of it is taxable component. If something happens and it goes to the children, the government will take a 17% bite. They'll take $170,000. No questions asked. It is what it is. So that's where, I mean, we probably won't get a complete chance today to go over estate planning, but planning around these taxes and how we not just plan right here and now, but a few steps ahead becomes super important, especially in the context of big lifestyle changes where sometimes it's downsizing the home and other changes. Because previously too, after you got to 65, it was damn near impossible to put money back into superannuation. You had to meet complex work tests between certain years. You couldn't bring forward, and it became very, very difficult. And a lot of the advice was just do everything you can before 65. So if we go into the changes to begin with, most of these work test requirements to put money in as tax-free money have been taken away between 67 and 74. So now we've got a whole lot more flexibility, especially where we've got things like taxable components and whatnot. We've got a lot more freedom to manoeuvre, to put more money in at a later age. These are things, and this is where the strategies continually change. The same person who saw me 2 years ago, I would have just said, look, there's not much we can do. It is what it is. These are the rules. The reason this has been a busy 12 months for me is that for all of my retired clients, I've just said, all right, come back into the office where everything we did before, it was valid then, but now, fortunately, these rule changes have come in. Let's look at it again in the context of these changes. And one of the other ones is that with the bring forward previously, what a bring forward is that you've got a certain cap that you can put in every year. At the moment, for a non-concessional, you can put in $110,000 per financial year. After a certain age, that's all you can do, 110, then 110. What we can do is we can actually use the next 2 years and put in $330,000. Not a change that we've ever been able to do. There's some strategies around recycling money so that basically the next generation doesn't pay tax. We can optimise the situation a bit better. So that's been a game changer. That's kept me very, very busy over and this is what's keeping me busy now. So just looking at time, and we've probably got a little bit of time for a pause on this because it's a fairly heavy area. Might just open up to some questions. Does anyone have any questions about this?
You can use the bring forward prior to 67 though, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's opened it up to between 67 and 74 now. Yeah. Perfect. Any other questions on this?
What happens when you're over 74?
When you're over 74, then it becomes, again, there's other work tests and other rules about how you can contribute, but it becomes very, very difficult unless, and that probably fits in very neatly with my next point about downsizer contributions. Effectively, it's very difficult to put money in tax-free into super, if not impossible. But then, one of the changes that have come in are about downsizer contributions. So the downsizer contribution basically lets you put in $300,000 into super if you've met certain conditions as tax-free money. Now, this goes on top of every other cap. It doesn't affect the other 330. So if you've met the right criteria, most of which are covered here about your superannuation. Yeah?
This age bracket that you're discussing there, if one partner in the relationship is older than the other,
Yes.
but only one fits into that age group, does that have any effect on any issue that you are discussing here with the super?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So firstly, when there's an age imbalance, it can open up opportunities depending on what the age gap is. But the thing with superannuation is that it's a very individual. There's no such thing as a joint account. Even with self-managed super funds, you tend to have your own superannuation based on your own age. So if there is, we'd look at the opportunities, but generally speaking, the rules that apply to the partner of that age, if we had a 50-year-old and a 75-year-old, as an example, just if we had that, there'd be two sets of rules that apply to each, generally. But opportunities that come with it that we might be able to cover in the Centrelink slide when we get to it, though. Does that answer that one, or?
Sort of. I wouldn't be able to ask another question because I don't have the knowledge to be able to go any further other than that question.
That's okay. Well, we can have a chat one-on-one after this. So, but basically what downsizer does is, if it's your own family home, for the most part, there are some exceptions, but this is where the majority of people, if you've used to be, after 65, if you've held the property for more than 10 years, and you can read some of these about within 90 days, there's no limit to putting $300,000 each into superannuation. I've used this for clients in their 90s. And again, superannuation is just a tax structure, how we invest this. So all of a sudden, for a couple, we can take $600,000 and it doesn't even have to be the money left over from the sale of the home. So you could be in a net zero position where you might have sold your house for 1.5 million and purchased another place for 1.5 million. If that's the case, it doesn't matter. You can even just pull some money out of your super that's so-called taxable and put it back in. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do. Other examples, you can put shares into superannuation. There's a million different possibilities. This previously, it was a couple of years ago that they introduced this as 65-year-olds. It very rarely got used because it was so technical. No one really knew how it worked. And after that 90-day window, there's not much you can, there's very little you can do about it. You've missed the boat, yeah.
Does that apply to investment properties? So regardless of your home, if you've got investment properties that are over 10 years old, would you be able to?
That's a very good technical question. I love it. They're the ones that get me going. Okay, it can. And not the it depends. And that's where it must be. I recently did one of these with a fairly expensive place out where it was an investment property, but because of the way it was structured for tax reasons, we were actually able to say that it was eligible for a capital gains discount. So based on that, for most people, I'd say the 98% rule that applies is that your own home's basically tax-free. Doesn't matter. You can buy your own home for whatever, for $20,000 back in the 50s, and now it's suddenly worth $2 million. You're not going to pay any tax if it stayed your own home. If it's partially eligible for that CG, that's how most people do it. We can start getting into the weeds with where a property is eligible. So for an investment property, if you've met certain criteria along the way, it can be done. But I'd just advise some caution before you do anything. Get some advice on this because it is a very tricky area. But yeah, so it can be. Yeah?
Can you explain a bit more about, it doesn't have the money from the sale proceeds, as you say, you sell it for 1.5.
Yep.
And you buy another place 1.5. But in the meantime, you got cash or shares. You can still dump that into super, even though it's not directly as a result of the sales.
Absolutely. If you meet the criteria for downsizer, with the forms and all of that, if you've got, if we say a real simple situation where you're buying and selling a like property, forget transaction costs, let's just say it's 1.5, you meet these criteria, you're eligible, and you've got a $600,000 share, cash, whatever. If it's members of a couple, that is, then it can be 300. You can do that. Doesn't matter if you're 95, 65 or 60. Yeah.
The entry point to be able to take advantage is this 10-year period of where you've lived in the property.
No, you need to have owned the property.
Yeah, okay, you've owned it. But if you've owned it for less than 10 years, is there any balance of any kind that goes on?
The way the tax office work, they're just criteria, they're selection criteria, they're yes or no questions. These are main ones. There are a few others, but again, that's honestly where sometimes planning comes in. Some of these happen as a result of discussions. What date do we sequence this? Even for tax and other purposes, there's a lot of considerations that come in. This is one of them. That's important. And yeah. So that's one of the changes. So yeah, basically they've brought this from 65 to 60, so we can do this earlier. The world, according to Shaun, I think they're just encouraging people, more and more people, to downsize their family home. There's a lot of people who are living in the big family home when they had 2, 3, 4 kids. That was perfectly fine for them then. That when they're empty nesters, it's probably a bit much. So then the next question that comes in, even if I go back a little bit, is that we put all of this money into super because now we can put all of this money in. What does it do to my pension? Because the thing with superannuation is that there's no, unlike, again, previous days when I went through uni learning financial planning, there were all of these massive benefits where you could put money in certain ways to get pensioner concessions when it came to the age pension. So how will it affect an age pension? So I might go into a bit of a refresher because especially for self-funded retirees and whatnot, they're probably not as well versed with Centrelink, but there might be people on part pensions, full pensions, because the first part is that your own home is completely exempt. So it doesn't matter if it's a $20 million home or a $300,000 home, Centrelink don't care about the value of it if it's your own home. Completely exempt. What they do care about, firstly, and this is what gets most people, are your assets. Cash, term deposits, shares, super, they're the biggest ones that get most people. That they look at either all of your assets or they look at your income. Now, most working people, the reason they can't get the age pension is their employment income. So while you're working, so this employment income, that can be you working a normal job, but it can also be things like deemed income from things like shares, everything else, things like annuities come in. We're not going to be able to cover this today, but there's also been significant changes in the last few years about being able to shelter certain assets and income from Centrelink. There's been a few changes to the retirement income covenant where we've actually been able to get people who weren't pension eligible artificially reduce their assets, a bit like the old rules used to go, to get them on. But for now, these are the things that they look at. So if you do make a downsizer contribution into super, generally speaking, it will be accessible by Centrelink for the pension. And basically the way the pension works, as you get more and more assets, more and more income, your pension reduces until it gets to the point where it goes zero, at which point you're not going to get a pension. So someone at its most extreme with $10, $20 million in the bank obviously isn't going to get a pension. Someone with $0 will, which leads to the most common question about, well, how much can I have in the bank? So as a couple, you can have, and I say in the bank, but I mean other assets, you can have up to now $915,000 while still getting a part pension. Anything, and for most people, most people are homeowners, and if you buy into a retirement village, if it's over that $216,000 threshold, you will still be treated as a homeowner, even though it's not a home in that traditional sense. As an example, anyone who buys a place here will be classified as a homeowner.
Sorry, what was that figure again?
216,000. It's low, and this is the thing. It's something that we get into with land lease communities and other more specialised types of retirement communities that apply. Not applicable in places like this. But what it does is that's basically the amount that you're allowed to have in the bank. And a lot of our job was people on the full pension. There's generally not much pension planning. If you've got less than, as a couple, less than 300, 400,000, you're already getting the full pension. There's not much for me to do, pension planning wise. But, or any questions so far on Centrelink or thresholds?
Sorry, just a bit.
Yep.
When you said that 216,000 that's kind of going into a property like this, what about if you went into full ageing in place, like a retirement village that has aged care and dementia and everything else like that?
That's a really good point. So that's my other, this aged care financial planning, that's my absolute specialty. I love it. So generally speaking though, with that, there's a different set of rules. One, there's a 2-year exemption if you own a home, but for the most part, you're treated as a non-homeowner. But when you go into aged care, they've got these things called refundable accommodation deposits or RADs. Any money, and most of them in Melbourne are 500,000-600,000 thereabouts, but there's a few in this area that have $2 million RADs or bonds. Any money you put into an aged care bond is completely exempt. So that's a whole, once we get there, like if that's ever, come and talk to me then, but but it is relevant, but it's actually quite favourable. So for people going into aged care without a home, even if they go into a place with a $2 million RAD or bond, they're still not homeowners, so it can be quite good. But now, I guess the name of the game for a lot of the time is trying to get people's assets under that 915,000. And the reason we want to do that is you're just on that threshold where if you can just get your pension gradually reduces, but if you can just get $1 worth of age pension, you get this magical thing called a pensioner concession card. Rates become cheaper, rego becomes cheaper, everything becomes cheaper. And I'll talk about what happens if it doesn't. Now, I'm just going to gloss over this, but I will provide a copy of this presentation to everyone, so you can either have a look at this, get in touch, or research these on your own. But there's some general strategies to reduce pension. Now, gifting, you can only give $10,000 per year, $30,000 over a rolling 5-year period. Basically, they don't want that person with $10 million in the bank to say, you know what, I've just given all my money to my son, my $9.5 million, now I've only got this much, give me the full pension. To avoid that, Centrelink have got some rules. Things like funerals, and that's where transferring assets to, I think this lady asked about people with age gaps. Sometimes I might say, you know what, let's get it out of this older spouse's super. Why don't we put it in the younger spouse's super? Then Centrelink won't assess it anymore. If that's an opportunity, that can be an amazing one. There was one that I did for a client. It left them about $25,000 better off just by changing whose name the hands were in. And assets valued properly, that can be a really big one, especially with investment properties and shares, making sure we've got that right. From a retirement village perspective, getting the right contract option becomes huge. A few years ago, 5-6 years ago, every retirement village contract was about the same in how they offered things. Now, we've got complexity, we've got choice, but we've got options. So things like upfront payment options, what it can have this, and this is where it becomes really, really important. So these are the thresholds. Let's just say, for argument's sake, I'm just making up numbers on the spot now. You've sold your house for $2 million and you've bought a retirement village for $1 million. Easy numbers, leaves $1 million in the bank, you're not going to get the pension. Simple. If they had another separate option where, and then there's obviously some deferred, and hopefully people have looked into these a bit, but deferred management fees and a few other costs also. What a lot of retirement villages now offer are upfront payment options where you pay more on the front end, and rather than on the back end. We'll go into why that can also be beneficial, but just purely from a pension perspective, by paying your fees up front, you can hide some money away, which means more pension eligibility from day one. So for certain people, that can be the difference between getting a pension and not. And again, not the right option for everyone, it's just knowing the numbers and knowing, is it the best option for you? For certain people, it's amazing. Other people, I'd just say, don't even worry about it, I've crunched them, we're better off doing this, it'll give you more money up front. Everyone's different. There's been changes to how income streams are handled, a bit like they used to be a few years ago. So that's something we're just not going to have time. I could spend a whole 2-3 hours just on that. And we for time, we're good. Okay, so has everyone seen these cards broadly? If you're age pension age 67, I hope most people would have seen either one of these. So the pensioner concession card, if you get any kind of pension, most income support payments, you'll get the age pension, you'll get a pensioner concession card. It makes everything cheap. Again, things like your registration will be half what I would pay. Rates and medical, it's just phenomenal. Great if you're on the pension, well deserved. That thing, depending on, for some people it can be worth, like $5,000 to $10,000. So, but for self-funded retirees, this is probably the part that I hate the most, is that not everyone's aware of their entitlements when it comes to it. And it's an absolute mess. Even when people try to apply for it, it becomes a mess. Just trying to register at Centrelink. I don't know if anyone's had dealings with Centrelink. Line up, deal with them, try to call the call centre, wait on hold for an hour, and then the call hangs up, and then you're dealing with a contract staff who probably doesn't know what they're doing either. It's a nightmare. But the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card can be worth its weight in gold. More so if you're dealing with any kind of health issues, which gradually increase as people get older, this thing is amazing. Now, the reason a lot of people miss it, especially self-funded retirees, is they're not accustomed to dealing with Centrelink. They haven't been while they were working. When they were retired, they've typically got enough. So they're not looking at that on a regular basis. This is where I've got a great change to report. Previously, you could have up to, as a couple, if your taxable and deemed income was over $92,000, which is also a fairly decent threshold for most retired couples with how they assess it, then you weren't able to, you were still able to get a Commonwealth Seniors Health Card. Even if you weren't pension eligible, depending on how you structured your assets, there was a very, very good chance. I've had clients with millions and millions of dollars in trusts and shares and all sorts of things who have got this card. They've increased this significantly. It's like they've basically increased it by 50%. So I've had a whole bunch of clients who, especially once we're at that multiple millions of dollars, who weren't previously eligible for a seniors health card. They're about to ratify this legislation. It's on the Centrelink website. They published all of this. We're just waiting for the pollies to do their job. When that happens, as a couple, that income, instead of being $92,000, is now going to be $144,000. So eligibility is just huge. Any questions on that?
Shaun, is that taxable income after tax or before tax?
No, so they look at your adjustable taxable income, but they also use the deemed income formula on any superannuation account-based pensions. So putting everything into super won't necessarily help, but yeah. But taxable income from a tax return, which you have to provide in the application, and deeming based on your Centrelink schedules and whatnot from your superannuation funds.
What if you don't have an income stream, but you've kept your money in accumulation? So you're not really generating an income as such. Does that become part of the assessment?
Yeah, great question. Under the age of 67, after 67, they will still deem it in the same way. So with an income stream, they will treat it as any other financial asset. They'll just put it in the pool, and then they'll apply their formula, that 0.75 to, and basically they will still. But if you're under 67 and in accumulation, then they will not.
Right. But this for the
You have to
Commonwealth.
be 67.
Yeah, I know. But the reason I mention this is that sometimes if you've got a spouse, so let's just say if you're 68 and your spouse is 64, as an example, that might be a strategy where you can pull it out of your super and put it into accumulation phase, even though your spouse may be eligible to have an income stream. In that situation, it wouldn't be, if that makes sense.
If you kept your money in the accumulation account,
Still deemed.
it's still deemed, is it?
Still deemed.
Right.
If you're eligible for these purposes, for 67, yep, still deemed.
Right.
Same way.
One of the other things that the card makes a difference to is fees if you're looking at a home care package, domestic care assistance through My Aged Care, and instead of being charged at the full rate, if you've got it, which makes it not worth it for self-funded retirees. But with this, you can then look at a subsidised rate.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about that because that's a really important part. So there's the care, and the reason this stuff is important is that for most people, their care needs increase, like getting the right care at the right time. So we'll talk about what happens as care needs increase. But the biggest fears, this is just my personal list that I've gone through, just specialising in retirement planning over the years. These are the 4 consistent themes that have come up. One of them is the fear of running out of money. And that drives that almost permission to enjoy, that you've spent your whole lifetime getting to this position where you've got your lifetime of wealth. Now is the time to enjoy it. And a lot of people, they're worried enough about money that they just struggle to spend the money on the things that bring them happiness, fulfillment, and sometimes time. And that is balanced a little bit by wanting to leave assets to their family members. Again, a lot of the people I deal with, they're probably not going to spend 100% of their wealth in their lifetime. But being able to do that properly so they know that they're looking after their kids, grandkids, whatever that is, causes that they're dear to, but that they also apply their own oxygen mask to, getting that right, that permission to enjoy becomes really important. Maximising entitlements, I absolutely hate when I see money being left on the table to the benefit of the tax office and Centrelink. I'd say pretty much everyone in the room loves their family, themselves, their time, more than they love the tax office and Centrelink. So it's just making sure that we continue with that, and also getting the right care at the right time. As in, when people first retire, I might even skip this, because when people first retire, we get into those carefree years, the fun stuff, enjoying. And this is where a lot of people go wrong about maximising their retirement finances, I find, is that people assume linear. They might jump on one of these calculators that ASIC or a super fund have that show this, a gradual linear drawdown. Whereas as someone who does this day in, day out and gets to see the finances, it's not that straightforward. It doesn't care, like your spending doesn't just go up on a formula. What happens is that when people start retirement, that's when they go do all the fun stuff. When they first retire, they're travelling, they're going on cruises, they're caravanning, whatever it is, all the grey nomad stuff. I know COVID's dampened things a little bit, but not really. Like when the first few years especially, first 5 to 10, and this isn't necessarily linked to age. There's clients who hit this in their 60s, 70s. Everyone's health is completely different. They go do all of the fun things when there's not as much disability. They're at this magical time where they've got their health, they've got all the time, they've got the time from having most people retired or left a business, and they've got the money. Because you almost need all three things. For someone like myself with 3 young kids, yep, I might have the health, I definitely don't have time, and the money isn't what it'll be when I'm 65. It is what it is. And if it gets a little bit, once you get a bit older, once the health gets knocked out of there, you're running out of time. All the money in the world doesn't make life any better. So I find, generally speaking, for most people, that 60 to 75 window is when they've got all three of these, and it's just about making the absolute most of their life and being able to do the things they want to do. We typically settle into a more quiet phase after that, where things begin to slow down. You're at home, probably a little bit more time with family, that kind of a thing. That all the travel and everything has gotten a bit older, and it's just settling down in the house, enjoying. And once we get into phase 3, just when we talked about aged care, we almost get to that point where costs can go up. And what I find as an aged care planner is that having more money can be a detriment in a way. Dealing with a high net worth client in aged care, because it's means tested, they pay these absolute phenomenal, these crazy prices that they're punished for having done the right thing, and more money doesn't change the quality of life at all at that point. That's, So, all right. Now, and I guess why retirement communities in particular is, again, the reason I truly believe in this. And because I went through this with my own grandparents when they had their old family home, their big home. There was a lot of maintenance involved. My grandfather, he was very hands-on. He had a whole garage full of tools and saws, and he was climbing up on ladders and all of that stuff. But it just, even my dad now, who he's about to hit 70, do I really want him doing all of that stuff? Not really. And just keeping some of these old family homes maintained, active, can be really difficult. And just, that's probably one of the biggest parts that comes in. From a social aspect, I saw this a lot during COVID. It was very isolating, living on your own in a family home, especially if you're a single person in your 60s, 70s, and communities like this. I saw this with my grandparents. My grandmother was just so social that all of a sudden there was a community dining room where they were doing all their meals, and just she knew all of her neighbours. Whereas, I don't know, I think back in maybe 50, 60 years ago, it might not have been an issue. I wasn't alive then, but now most family homes, it tends to be just a garage door going up and down is all you see off most of your neighbours. Whereas when you're in a like-minded community, it's just a little bit different. That's where things like sports and interests, being able to go out with a bus, whatever, every facility is slightly different with what they offer. Even having, for some, not this facility, might be caravan parking on site if it's important for some. Others being close to things that you want to do in the city, the theatre, whatnot, that might be, but there's different flavours. This is one flavour, it's good, doesn't suit everyone. And care is what I'll go into about the home care, because care needs change. The thing is, most people making these decisions are in their 70s, 60s and 70s, where care needs will go up, not down. So that's some of the features that most villages have. But might even quickly, how many people have we got who are currently in place in a retirement community or village at the moment? Oh, so everyone's still looking at, okay.
No, there are some.
Are there?
Come on, residents, put your hands up.
Come on, do we have any residents here? Yeah, okay. So out of these, I mean, because one of them is that, I mean, these are some of the, I've put this together myself. These are the pros, these are the cons about lifestyle community options, not having family look after you, access to services and just not worrying, less stress, can free up some cash. And for some people, the cons can be things like just not being used to apartment living. Most people in Melbourne, Australia, tend not to be. Be a bit further, the contracts can be a nightmare. And a big one that I get a lot of the time is I've left it too late. But is there anything I've missed or that you'd add to it? Pros, cons?
The pros are if you pick the right place, you don't have to move again.
Don't have to move again, yeah. Was that the decision making when you made the choice?
I haven't made a choice, I'm weighing them up.
Weighing them up, yeah.
Probably the biggest negative is you rent yourself away from, family and friends mainly, because they're not in the city because the land costs too much.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, that distance from family and friends, depending on stage of life, yeah, that can be an issue for some.
And feeling secure.
Yeah.
In access to the building, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the security thing's an interesting one, especially now, yeah. And when it comes to travel too, depending on the person, but now that borders have opened back up, just if it is a holiday, being able to lock it up as opposed to a home and just having this space. But yeah, look, those are most of the ones. I'll always look at adding and tweaking this if I've missed anything or any big glaring ones. But from a care perspective, when it comes to most people, has everyone heard of the Commonwealth Home Support Program and home care packages? And if you're okay with answering, is there anyone who's currently receiving a home care package at the moment? Or any... Let's talk about these a little bit because they often get missed too. So the first one is the Commonwealth Home Support Program. Now that is done, My Aged Care administer these, and I think because My Aged Care do it, that sometimes is the bit of a problem. People start thinking, oh, My Aged Care, I'm not that old, do I really have to do this? And then I've been through this dance even with my parents, and men are the hardest generally to convince to get an aged care assessment. But the reason it's important, so the RAS, that's called a Regional Assessment Service. That's like a baby assessment where they just ask some questions. And especially if people are in the family home now, just get it done. It's done by your local council and it allows you to access services a lot cheaper. So you can get things like a cleaner, a handyman, a gardener, you might get things like Meals on Wheels, whatever it is, at a potentially highly subsidised rate because that's your taxpayer dollars at work. And you don't need to be in a wheelchair to be receiving all of this stuff. Generally speaking, if you're about the age of 70, just get the assessment done. Worst case scenario is that you might go through it and they'll tell you how healthy you are. But generally speaking, you're better off just getting it done. And even one of them is just being in the system.
Who does it?
It's done through My Aged Care.
So you've got to go through the Centrelink.
Not Centrelink, it's similar, but My Aged Care is another government department. Just in case Centrelink wasn't enough, but look, it is another one. But it starts with this, but the other part of the care that comes in are home care packages. Now, there's private care and home care. So a facility like this, I'm pretty sure there's private care that's on site here. But what home care can do, things that keep you independent, things like allied health, specialised support, meal preparation, what a lot of people don't realise is that there's government funding on the table. Everyone's different and there's different levels of it. So for someone very infirm and ill, they can be on a level 4 package where they've got $53,000 worth of funding from the government to go and get services in their home, and this counts as a home. So there's some costs involved, but and this is where it becomes really important. So anywhere from a level 1, level 2, if there's $16,000 worth of funding, level 2 tends to, I see a lot of them come in. What I tell, most people they're not aware of this, that it exists, until it gets too late. Because at the moment, one of the issues we're facing is staffing. Unfortunately, it is what it is. Like a few years ago, pre-COVID, I would have said maybe a 3 to 6 month wait. Now we're looking at a 24-month plus wait on getting home care packages, and for a lot of people, it's just they're never going to get it. So if we can, the earlier we start this process, the better. Even if you're in the system, because. And even, I mean, look, home care provides one of the things, but there's also things like private care along with these service packages. Now, private care, you can organise that. I mean, there's plenty of consultants that I refer to who specialise in that, who look at clinical needs, sort it out. But again, one of the benefits of retirement villages is that it can be a bit easier because you've probably got a home care provider coming here who's already looking after X many residents. To add an extra one probably won't be a big deal, whereas to go add someone a whole new residential home that someone's in can be more difficult. And with retirement living, there's all different types of, yes, there's the structured home care packages, but then there's retirement communities that, as an example, some specialise in dementia, and they've already got a good solid care arrangement for people who meet that criteria. Here, there's certain care arrangements that they can talk about. Some villages are more independent. They're probably more for people in their 50s and 60s, and they don't have as many. There's everything in between, but when it happens, being in the system and registered and using these entitlements, because if you've got, we can go through how it's done, and you know, we talked a little bit about it. Full pensioners pay one cost. Self-funded retirees, it's an income tested fee. Doesn't matter about your assets too. So again, changing the right structure can be a really good scenario for home care. But the main thing is that there's a lot of care available. It's generally easier to find it in places that other people are receiving it. But if you're in the family home, it's also a possibility. It's also there. That's what it's there for. But you just have to do it. Get that first aged care assessment and just see how you go. At the moment, we're looking in this area, a three-month wait on getting assessed for home care, getting an aged care assessment. I'd do that sooner rather than later. We probably won't go through all of this stuff, but there's a lot of info that I'm going to provide to you afterwards. Yeah?
On this home care system,
Yeah.
can you have that done when you're in your regular home
Yes.
and transfer it into somewhere like this?
Absolutely.
Just transfer it over?
Yeah. So that probably is more of a typical common option that people do. Yeah. Look, it all depends. Now, I think the last 2 COVID years have been a bit different because people haven't been able to receive the care at home. They've often moved to somewhere that provides it, where it's easier to obtain, such as somewhere like this. But if you did, as an example, have a level, like a package that was in place, depending on the provider, especially if you're using something like I'm just saying I'm already here, but a Bolton Clark, I think they're the largest home care provider. Yeah, they are the largest home care provider in Australia. So what you'll find is, most likely, I mean, I've got nothing to do with Bolton Clark, but they are the largest, and if you were already in their ecosystem, I would suspect you'd find it a whole lot easier receiving a home care package at home and then moving into a Bolton Clark facility for continuity of care to occur. But everyone's different, I guess. That's probably, I always say, finish every sentence with that. And there's also, again, we're not going to get a chance to really talk about this, but from being Victorians, we've got some of the strongest rules about going from retirement villages into residential aged care, because it might be necessary for one or both people to go into aged care. And if that happens, it's magical. So I deal with other states too, like New South Wales and Sydney clients, but I'm much prefer Melbourne, where if someone was in a retirement village, basically the retirement village has to fund aged care costs. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that makes it really, really easy. So I can spend a whole day talking about all of this stuff. I often go, yeah. But for the time being, I guess retirement villages are that. It depends on the level of care, but it's a bit more of a stopgap for most, and it's often got the things that a home doesn't, like that just easy walk-in showers, probably not huge amounts of stairs. They're purpose-built to support future needs. So, yes, to summarise, is that there's a whole bunch of opportunities for people over the age of 65 to get money into super now. They weren't there before. 2 years ago, all these opportunities were not there. Now they're here. And just want to make sure that if they're applicable to you and they serve you, that we use them. Use every entitlement, because generally speaking, it means you or your family will pay less tax for the most part. And with a healthcare card, I see a lot of people losing their pensions, especially a lot of retirees are very asset rich in their property. And often this can result in a lost pension. Even people not knowing about the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, how it works, and just the fact that they are indeed entitled to it, or retired people, there's other concessions out there that people just aren't, again, not used to it. So just making sure that we're making the most of everything. And when it comes to a lifestyle choice, a big one, I'm such a firm believer, as in making the right lifestyle decision for you, even if it is driven by emotions, that's fine. Like my motorbike that I have, I didn't buy that. I didn't buy my Triumph because I thought that would be a great investment. I bought it because that's my meditation. I love it. And choosing the right place that you're going to be, that you won't have to move. There are definitely financial implications, and we have to talk about that, what it all means, but it's making a good lifestyle decision, how you can see yourself live and doing the things that you want to do. Because life is short. I find for most people, with that health, time and money, once the health is gone, then it becomes, and really starts going, it becomes really, really difficult to start enjoying it. And that's where things like those future care options. Most people who come into a retirement village aren't probably at that acute care stage that I deal with clients in their late 80s and 90s when it comes to aged care nursing homes. But just keeping that at the back of our mind now and in the short to medium and then long term, how is this going to play out? We probably don't want this to be an absolute nightmare for our children either. So hopefully it's a nice, easy, gradual process. And yeah, look, in a nutshell, that's our presentation on what we do at Retirement Village Financial Advice. We just take this stress and anxiety out of moving in. Because, look, I've been through this stuff myself, and I know what it's like to almost sit next to you and have no idea. Oh my God, there's a 100-page contract with deferred management fees. There's 3 different options. What does this all mean? And what does it mean for me in particular? And just having that clear roadmap, and there might be funds left over. How do we actually enjoy this without worrying about running out of money? It's really weird. This other client, so he's got millions of dollars in super, but he's been working since the age of 15, and he's just paranoid about running out of money. He's in his late 60s, and I managed to, after, he's a retired engineer, and then with all the models, it took over a year to get this, but convinced him to go buy his Land Cruiser Prado. And it can better tow his, but just that discussion, he'd never bought a brand new car. Man of means and all of that, but just once we got to the point that you're not going to run out of money, there's a good chance you're going to leave this money to your kids. These are what the numbers look like, and just giving him the permission to enjoy that without worrying, crap, can I actually afford this? So obviously making the most out of age pension and better understand this whole system. We are that independent third party in this. I'm not, I don't work for any retirement village or anything like that. Here so, and a big part of it too is that peace of mind and reducing family disputes. Funnily enough, retirement villages can cause a lot of that. It's more just from people not knowing what's going on, to be honest. Children not necessarily understanding, and other family members, and sometimes having that objective can help. So, pretty much all I have. Any questions? I know we've asked a few, but the floor's open now. Anyone?
You touched on that Victoria's rules are different.
Yep.
For, say, you're in a retirement village that also has a nursing home on, an aged care facility on site. And one of the couple goes into the nursing home, and I gathered from what you're saying, the rules around the financial rules are different in Victoria to other states.
Yeah, so
We've all got a big bond.
it doesn't matter about being on site, but what happens, just very broadly, retirement village legislation is state-based. Every state has its own rules and its own set of legislation. So that's why, but whereas when it comes to aged care, it's federal. It doesn't matter if I'm dealing with a nursing home in Queensland or Victoria, it's all the same. But in terms of those rules, basically, with retirement villages, and I'll say this as a downside, that you've got a smaller market. You can't just go to any real estate agent, a Ray White, a Buxton, just to put it on the market. So the good thing about Victorian ones is that if it came to a move into a nursing home, then the retirement village actually releases the funds to pay for your daily accommodation payments and other things. And it's enshrined in legislation. So we can request that the retirement village actually pay for that move until they sell.
They have to move out of the retirement village because they don't actually offer that extra care. They've got to liquidate what they're holding.
Yeah, and that's if it's appropriate. And this is where it depends. Like I said, there's a lot of people who you might be able to increase your care needs within that retirement village, move you to another wing, go to a level 4 package, and that covers perfectly. There might be some people that I have dealt with, as an example. They might be here, something's happened, and they really can't support that due to whatever reason. If that happens, then basically you can actually ask the retirement village operator, not ask, request, and then they will, and it's enshrined in legislation, they will pay those aged care costs. Again, it's a complex area, but there's options there that if the same person saw me in Sydney, I'd give them a completely different answer. I guess if that...
It's not Victorian legislation.
Correct, it's Victorian legislation.
And they have to kind of negotiate with what the Commonwealth say about aged care?
No, to be honest with you, it's not as much, it's more about just knowing the entitlements. It's just, honestly, it's just following the process. We've got templated letters where we just send, like if it was here, we'd just send the Bolton Clark Finance Department, hi, this person has entered into aged care, they met this criteria, please fund this as per this. And it just happens within a month.
Even though you're not in an aged care on site?
Yep.
It's separate.
Could be completely separate, makes no difference. If it's under the Retirement Village Act, you could be, yeah.
And I'll just add, here at Europa on Alma, Bolton Clark will buy your apartment back off you if it's not sold within the 6 months. So generally, aged care gives you 6 months to get the rent together, so you know that you would definitely have it.
That's actually a big, I saw one of the emails I got this morning was from I don't want to say the name of the retirement village, but we've been over 2 years waiting for them to sell, and the lady has gone into aged care, and we're using certain mechanisms to fund it, so it's not too bad. I mean, if we were in another state in Australia, we'd be stuffed, but we're unfortunately, just due to that contract, I think that their buyback period, and this is one of those things, it's actually a good point, some really good point, thanks for bringing that up, is that every retirement village contract is completely different. And that's why it's really important to know. So this lady, as an example, she has a 5-year buyback. So then for the next 5 years, we'll just have to hope and pray that it gets sold, which can be an absolute, it is a nightmare. We're 2 years in, I've been dealing with the family, just trying to sort their situation out. Having something like a 6 month is a game changer. So hopefully you won't need it, but if you do, then we can get that whole situation sorted pretty quickly and easily.
You mentioned that under the Retirement Villages Act, that there's requirement for the retirement village to at least pay for the daily fees while
Yep.
waiting to sell.
Yes.
But some contracts, when you go into a retirement village, it doesn't spell that out, that they have an obligation
Yeah.
within whether 6 months or 5 years in that case. So where do we stand where if a contract doesn't actually spell out that they have the,
Yeah.
what happens then?
There's overriding legislation. So the pre-2017 contracts have a certain set of rules about what has to get funded in a certain way. So those contracts won't have it included. After a certain date, then they've changed. I think it's off the top of my head, don't quote me. It's a July 7th, 2017. They changed the whole rules. That was when the legislation came in. So when, as an example, even just this client that I alluded to, where in that 5-year period, for that contract was signed, I think like 12, 15 years ago. It was signed a long time ago, but with those changes, we were still able to request. What I think you'll find now, because I see these contracts day in, day out, almost every contract that I see has some kind of provision that references the aged care, that funding mechanism. I'd be surprised if you didn't. And if you didn't see it, I'd probably say that would be more of a sign that it might not be under the Retirement Villages Act. It now might be something like a land lease community or independent living unit or a strata title or something else, which is not the case here.
So that changed in 2017, where there is that component in the Retirement Villages Act that requires them to take responsibility.
Yeah.
Prior to 2017,
Didn't matter. I went through this with my own grandparents with their retirement village. It sold when it sold. We just had to figure out how they moved into aged care. It took my grandparents 2 years to sell their retirement village, over 2 years I think, it's all a big blur. It was years ago, it was almost a decade ago now. But when that happened, we had no choice but to fund it from everything else. And yeah, but we can take this off. Like, honestly, this is another thing, I can talk about this for hours and hours on end. Just to sum up, I might just quickly say, so thank you all for listening. And I've just got a feedback form. I've got two. I've got digital and I've got paper, just in case. So if you can, I think, if you could, just try the digital one. There's also a 5-minute health check that just, if you want to do it, great. But I'm genuinely after some feedback on if there's anything I could improve, do better, that you want covered for other ones. But other than that, so that would be very greatly appreciated, but that's all I've got now. Thanks.